began to turn northward very slowly. There were some holdouts in the Soviet Union, and even today we have one in North Korea. But they're against the tide. They're against the tide of history. They're counter-tidal. And I began to watch the development towards liberalism, socialism, all the way up the gamut toward the top one, which is no government, which is anarchy. And what do you know? What else is in there? The Internet. The Internet is total political freedom. You can say or do whatever you want, and there was no recourse. People couldn't even find you. At that moment, I began to be concerned about, well, first of all, I began to look for the turn southward because we had already gone northward to its limit, and we were due for a turn southward toward more intrusive government. I couldn't figure it out, but there were some things that bothered me. I remember there were some riots in Seattle against free trade. I was shocked by that. We had just won a war proving that free trade is superior. We had a controlled blind experiment between East and West Berlin that proved that West Berlin was superior to communism. How could these kids be rioting against free trade? That really struck me. Second, this guy Ted Kaczynski was sending bombs in the mail to industrialists because he was a Luddite, basically, against industrialization and modernization. And I said, how could that be? And I figured, for a while I said to myself, well, these are just random crazy events, but I put them in a Post-it in the back of near my medulla oblongata and forgot about them. But on 9/11, when I took one look at that, and I saw what they were doing, they were to form the so-called Patriot Act, and the government was swarming over, passing laws. The day after the 9/11, I flashed a buy signal on the market, and I called my staff in my office and told them we are now headed southward, and it will end in fascism. And they looked at me, and they're used to me. The poor souls, they're wonderful, but they're used to my predictions. And when you're first, you always look wrong. But I said, we are headed for a southward trek, and it's going to go down from right wing down to middle wing, down to left wing, down to Republican, down to Democrat, down to liberal, socialist, and all the way down the road. We are on that trip right now. We are on southward, and those who feel that the trend is that way are correct. They haven't perhaps made it so particularized as I have, but that is what they've done. And it's sad, and I hope I'm no longer here by the time it reaches box 10, but whatever, that's the way I see the political situation. The way to play it is remember that gold is the ultimate freedom. It's the only asset that has no counterparty risk. And therefore, in the money I manage, I tell people to put some money in a safety deposit box, never on your person, never near your home, and never put wealth in your home, ever. No expensive paintings, nothing. I do my own photography, and I put my own pictures on the wall.
Let me ask you something here. I'm cutting in here, but as you come to the end of an empire and it begins to decline, you see an expansion of corruption. Is the country being looted today by these elite banking interests that run our government, or what some people refer to as criminal syndicates? Because you stated in your August newsletter that the Federal Reserve Bank in New York is now planning to increase its staff by nearly 50% during a recession, revealing who benefited from this crash.
You don't miss anything, do you? That was just one sentence. I'm not going to answer that on this show. That'll be in my book, and I don't want people jumping up out of their chairs. But I will say this, is it being looted? Without a doubt. And it's being looted through the printing press. It's the most convenient way to loot. I mean, look at Bernie Madoff. He was a piker. He made off with a small amount of money. The government just prints by the trillions. Do you know how much $1 trillion is? If you spent $1 million a day, every day, since Julius Caesar was born, you couldn't spend $1 trillion. And they've just raised the deficit from estimated deficit this decade from $7 trillion to $9 trillion. Nobody noticed. Do you understand how much money has been looted on that, just one little stroke? And look at Mountain Pass. It's America's biggest, perhaps only serious rare earth mine. Guess who one of the investors is?
Right, Goldman Sachs.
Goldman Sachs. And who was the Secretary of Treasury who looted $700 billion out of the Treasury to save the banks on Wall Street, including Goldman Sachs? Who was it?
Hank Paulson.
Yeah, who is he?
Right, former CEO of Goldman Sachs.
What a surprise. What a coincidence.
Yeah.
I will cover this more in my book, and that's all I feel like saying right now.
Well, Congressman Stearns, when I had him on the air, had an exchange with former Treasury Secretary Paulson, and he was talking about this money and the fact that Treasury Secretary Paulson, or former Treasury Secretary Paulson, was almost not just taking the money, because he said if they wouldn't have bailed out AIG, which the money was taken and part of that was put towards that Goldman would have been bankrupt. And he hit him with that right during those congressional hearings. And he knew because he was on the inside. So basically all that money was given out. It was used to prop up Goldman Sachs, while companies like Lehman, because he was acting as a wrecking machine also by not bailing out institutions like Lehman Brothers. And so Lehman fails. And the direct beneficiary of that is Goldman Sachs, because they were a competitor. So there's this consolidation of power and this further looting of this country. Is there not?
I have no comment on that. I just say that I think the country is moving southward. But what I will say is this. There was a big struggle to install Social Security in this country, and that's fine. But it was unfunded. In other words, they stuck it to the next generation. They also had Medicare and Medicaid, unfunded. But these liabilities, and this is simple math, again, simple math, go broke in the next 10, 20 years. And now they want to have a new health program. And this marches on, and there's just more and more promise to the future that there is no way in hell we can produce. And the government talks about the great productive capacity of America. Well, yeah, it is, but we're priced out of the market. This is not 1950. This is 2009, and it's a new world of new giants emerging. For many years predicted that we would have not only China, but India. We have, there's half of humanity right there. Africa has yet to come on stream. We have yet to hear from them. How much will their wages be? They'll eventually hurt China. This country is in such deep trouble. And there's nobody who's really getting it with the guts to get up and say that we are in real economic trouble. Maybe with the exception of Ron Paul. But the rest of them are a bunch of cowards. And they're going along with the crowd. The people are just drifting along and just taking care of their own little lives. And they'll pay for it with paradox and irony.
Let's move on to uranium, nuclear energy a bit here, Mr. Dines. Where are we in the uranium market at this point?
Uranium is one of the primary holdings, I believe, should be in a smart portfolio. The smart ones got in 8 years ago, and they whippets running the funds pushed them way too high. And then when the crash hit, they had to sell them to meet margin calls. Several things. One, stocks do not move with commodities, and that's because of the mass psychology of people who buy commodities is different from people who buy stocks and refuse to buy commodities. So they don't always move pari passu in terms of the news or the mass psychology involved. In this case, uranium metal last year outperformed every other metal in the world, including gold. It held up beautifully well, but the uranium stocks got creamed because of forced selling by the hedge funds and all other funds. So you need to get back to the basics of what's going to be happening in the future. We have a short-term there's a depression going on, and perhaps even less oil being used, but there is an energy crisis. For the moment, natural gas is way too depressed out here. It's the biggest contango I've ever seen on that one, but that should recover in due course. First cold winter is going to certainly help it. But there's going to be an energy crisis. The terrorists, as they're called, are bent on disrupting the flows of oil. Who knows what could happen? Pakistan could fall to the extremists, or Saudi Arabia, or they could sabotage the oil terminals in the south of Arabia. Any such cutoff like that could change the world's dynamics literally in an instant. So, to me, geopolitically, every country is going to want to have at least some energy security within its own borders. Yeah, they'll try windmills until they figure out they can't get any neodymium, and they'll try this or that, and biomass, well, there's no room for it, there's not enough. Corn, well, sooner or later, people are going to get tired of putting food into their gas tanks, and all these other things are going to fall by the wayside. Geothermal might start earthquakes, but the bottom line is the only serious alternative to the energy crisis is going to be nuclear power. As soon as our leaders perceive the end of oil, and it'll happen eventually, they will immediately seize the remaining oil in the world for military purposes. You're not going to put a windmill on a fighter jet aircraft. So that's going to be, you can forget about using the last drop. This is going to go for military. The nuclear power has got to be the answer. And in America, there's still naval contemplating the China syndrome and Chernobyl, and not getting that the U.S. Navy has used nuclear power for 50 years and never had an accident, that France